Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So if you're a regular viewer, you know I normally talk about sawmills and lumber production and tractors and building barns and things like that. Today's video is going to be on a completely different topic, and that is going to be inspecting, evaluating, and appraising a Honda S2000. Now I owned two of these cars back in the day when they were new. I consider this to be one of the best sports cars of all time. You know, this car is over 20 years old. It's still as competent and as good as many of the best sports cars on the road today. And so I've kind of become a local expert on these cars, and I've helped a lot of people evaluate cars they were considering for purchase. And more recently, in the past few years, I've helped people out who are buying cars online through auctions. But I see a lot of people making mistakes when they're shopping on auctions like Bring a Trailer, Cars and Vids, and places like that. You know, they're missing glaring issues with certain cars. They are focusing on non-issues with the cars. They're getting confused by things that are normal. And it's made me want to put out a video on this topic so that I can help people become more educated, better shoppers for these cars, because these are now going up in value. This is really an up-and-coming collectible car. Again, still a great sports car, and so this to me is a very compelling buy, but you need to know what you're doing when you shop around. So we're going to talk about this car. This is a 2005 model. This is an AP2, but what I'm going to talk about today equally applies to the earlier AP1 model years. And so we're going to go through a couple key areas. What I've done is I've taken my standard inspection report format, and I'm going to put a sanitized version of this online, linked below the video, so you can download it. You can read through it as we're talking about this car. It's not so important to focus on this particular car, but really focus on the things I talk about, the things I'm looking for when evaluating an S2000. And I think that'll be very helpful if you're ever in the position to look at one of these cars. And so on this inspection report, I've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 main areas I look at, and then some notes at the end. So we're going to step through all this. Stick around and we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing on my list, I look at the body and the paint, and then look for the presence of VIN tags. Now Honda put 10 VIN stickers on assorted body panels over this car. There's one on the underside of the hood, there's one on the inside of the front bumper, there's one on each front fender, there's one on each door, one on each door jamb, one on the rear bumper, and one on the trunk. And you want to look for those VIN tags, and look for any type of irregularity around those tags. Have they been painted over? Did somebody try and peel them off? Did somebody try and mask around them when they did paint work? Those are all clues you want to look for with the VIN tag. Sometimes they're totally missing altogether, right? And any of those anomalies will tell you that there's probably been some type of body work done on the vehicle, and that's a very important clue. And you don't have to be a body expert to even realize that. You just have to go look for those tags and make sure they're original, and they look like they, were put on at the factory. Okay, so that's the first thing you want to check. Go around and look at all those VIN tags, and then in general, you want to assess the paint, the clear coat, the body work. Look for any issues. You really want to look for things beyond normal wear and tear. Okay. Because these cars are 20-25 years old at this point. Unless it's in a museum, it's going to have some signs of being driven and used. So little things like chips, not a big deal. But if you see major door dings, major dents, if you see any indication that the car was parked outdoors for a long period of time, the clear coat might be hazy or have some damage. Those are things to note. You want to look at the panel fit, all the gaps. They should be uniform. These cars have very, very good fit and finish from the factory, so you want to see nice uniform gaps. These two joints between the front bumper and the front fenders, one on each side, these are really great to look at. Those have very, very important clues. It should be a nice, tight, even, smooth joint. If it's not, if it's cockeyed, that probably indicates some kind of body work went on at the front of the car. So those are really good telltales. Other ones are back here. where the rear bumper meets the rear quarter near the taillights. I'll zoom in and show some close-up footage of that. That was never a great fit from the factory, so you should see that it's a little bit goofy even on a 20-year-old, 25-year-old car. And that's an example of something that doesn't look right, but it's normal, okay? So you want to look for something like that. Let's see. One of the biggest issues I run into on these cars is that people installed paint protection film back in the day. That film is now, 15, 20, 25 years old. The film technology we had back then was not great. So if that film is still on the car, by now it's probably yellow and hazy and has all kinds of cracks in it. And if you've got that on the front of the car, some people cover the whole hood with that stuff or the front fenders, you're looking at a couple $1,000s to get that properly taken off without damaging the paint and the clear coat. And then you're going to need paint correction, and then the paint will probably have faded differently under the film, so you're going to need to put new film on. So we tend to think of paint protection film as a plus. Well, on a 20 to 25-year-old car of this era, it's really kind of a liability. So that's something you want to look for. If it has PPF, check it carefully. Try and get an idea how old it is, assess the condition, and mentally budget, a couple $1,000s if it needs to come off and be refurbished. The other thing you want to do, go around, open up the hood, the trunk, all the doors, make sure everything operates smoothly. No sagging, anything like that. This car, the only issue I found was that the checkers on the door that keep it from opening too far, those were kind of stiff. They needed grease, so that was 20 cents worth of grease to fix that, like brand new. So this particular car, aside from the grease needed there, really had no major issues. There's a scuff on the front bumper that happened during shipping. That can be airbrushed, but this car is desirable because it has all original paint. No bodywork or paint work was ever done. You can run a paint meter on the metal panels. You normally want to see between 5 and 6 mils of paint thickness. So this is a great example of a good body on an S2000. Nice paint, nice clear coat. This car I could look at and know right away that it was garage kept for most or all of its life. I mean, the paint and the clear coat doesn't stay this good on cars that are parked outdoors. The only other issue is if you drag your fingers across this, it's not smooth. So, this car probably hasn't been waxed in a long time, but even with that, this clear coat looks so good. This is clearly a car that was stored indoors. Okay, so next on our list is the convertible top. This is a place where you're normally going to find damage. This car miraculously still has the original top with no tears and no damage. That's hard to believe. It really is. It probably, again, means this car was well cared for. Or, some people, they love these cars so much they only drive them when it's good weather with the top down, that they leave the top down all the time and it doesn't get any wear or tear or exposure to the elements. So you want to look and make sure there are no tears in the top. From about the middle of the 04 production run all the way through the end of the 09 model, there were some issues with sharp edges in the frame of this top that over time would wear through the cloth. It's really vinyl itself, and tear through, cause leaks and other things. So a lot of these cars have had the tops replaced. Sometime that wasn't done well, and so you'll notice scratches and cracks and things with the trim around the back of the cockpit, around the roll hoops. But this car's got the original top, everything on, all the trim looks great, no tears. But what you do want to check for is you reach in here between second and third crossbars, there's an elastic strap, and I'll mix in some close-up footage of this. And what that does is it pulls the bars together when you fold the top to put it down, and helps it fold nicely and stow down nice and flat. Over time, it's been 15, 20, 25 years for these cars. These elastic straps lose their stretch and they don't really do anything. And that was really the only issue I found with the top on this car. Those straps need to be replaced. They still have a little bit of function, but they're getting to the point where they're not going to help, let the top fold properly. And so that's all we needed to really worry about on this car. This car did have felt put over many of the sharp edges of the frame that would have caused tearing, and so it didn't tear the top. And that kind of indicates, the former owner of this car, this was a one-owner car, probably knew about this issue and took steps to avoid it. So we've got a nice original top here. That's not always the case. Look over the top very, very carefully. And then you also want to look at the latches and the catches where the front end of the top latches into the windshield header. Look for any wear and tear. They shouldn't be loose. They shouldn't be sloppy. When you latch the top down, it should be nice and tight. There shouldn't have been any metal rubbing that caused one of the parts to dig into the other. Those should look good as well. Okay, so number 3 on my list is glass, and when I talk about glass, I'm including the headlights, and so you want to check those over, look for any cracks, any big chips or anything. They should be clear, not hazy. Again, a car that's been garage kept, these will be nice and clear and shiny, and that's another good clue of the general overall condition of the car. So you want to check the headlights, the taillights. You can include the side markers in there as well. And then, look at the windshield, look for chips, look for damage. Look for the Honda emblem on the windshield. That way you'll know if it's original. Now this car had the windshield replaced within the last year or so. It's not a Honda windshield, but when we looked at the manufacturer tag over there, it's the company that makes the windshields for Honda. So it's essentially the same windshield. And so if you know the windshield's been replaced, look to make sure it's a good quality windshield. And then look at the trim around the windshield. We can tell that this is Honda trim. A lot of times, windshield repair or replacement companies, they'll try and reuse the old trim. It doesn't look nice. It looks wavy or it doesn't sit flat. But this is clearly new replacement original Honda trim that's been put back on here, and everything is nice and tight and no gaps, no wiggles, no fit and finish issues with that. And then on the topic of the windshield, the early S2000s had a black vinyl wrap put over the windshield frame here, and you want to give that a look, make sure that's still in good condition. This is obviously a garage kept car. This looks great, but on a car that's been exposed to the weather, this could be faded, cracked. There was also a period of time where some people decided to peel this off because they wanted to see the body paint color underneath it. Well, turns out Honda really didn't QC the paint on the windshield header during those years, unless it was a black car with black paint. And all the other colors, since they knew they were putting black vinyl wrap over there, they didn't take the time to QC that paint or check it for defects. So a lot of people peeled this off and got a big surprise underneath. So if you're looking at an early model year S2000 that's supposed to have this black vinyl wrap and it doesn't, check that paint work carefully, because there could be defects. And then of course you want to look at the side glass, the rear glass, and the convertible top. Check that that's all either original or good quality replacement, no cracks, scratches, or anything like that. And any of the gaskets, weather stripping associated with the glass, check that over too. All right, so next on my list are wheels and tires. And this is generic. This kind of applies to any car, really. Look at the wheels, see if there's any scratches or curb rash or failure of the clear coat. This car, there's very minor rash on the passenger side wheels, but not enough that it would even concern me. And in general, these wheels look great. I mean, they look like they're brand new. The tires also look great. They have a lot of tread left. They're in good condition, but these tires are 12 years old, and that's generally kind of considered a liability on a car. So it would pain me to replace these tires, but that's something I recommended in this case. Get new tires. It costs about $1,000 for good quality tires for this car, and really it's just safer and better all around. The other thing you want to check when you look at the tires, regardless of age, regardless of tread depth, look for any weird wear patterns on the tires. That could indicate there had been a balance problem, an alignment problem, or that the car was used at the track. I mean, if you ever track the car, you know that puts a hurting on your tires, and it's usually pretty obvious. So those are kind of clues you can pick up by looking at the condition of the tread. You want to make sure it's nice and flat and none of the obvious issues from balance, alignment, or track use. Okay, so next on my list is to look at the undercarriage, the suspension, and the exhaust system. And if you can get the car up on a lift or up on ramps and get underneath there, that's great. But you don't have to. You can take your cell phone, turn on the camera, put it on a board, and just slide it under the car and record a movie as you move that board around and get a view of different parts of the car. Pull that back out, you can review the movie, and you can see a lot that way. But Honda did a pretty good job as far as corrosion resistance with the coatings and the paint and the sealant they used underneath the car, so there should not be rust issues. Really, the only place you should see light rust is on cast iron components in the suspension, but everything else should look good. If you do see excessive rust, that could indicate the car was driven on winter roads with salt. May or may not be a problem, but it's not desirable, certainly from a collector standpoint. So ideally, you won't see any rust other than light surface rust on the cast iron parts. You want to look for any damage or scrapes, other problems. Another common issue with these cars is people don't understand how to jack up a car, and they put a jack underneath the body panel or the rocker, and they damage the car. I mean, there's pinch wells under there with very specific locations marked for jacking, and some people can't figure that out. So you might want to look, under this area and along the edges of the fenders, see if anything got creased or buckled because it was jacked improperly. But in general, this probably applies to any car. Look at the undercarriage. It's going to tell you a story about the conditions the car was driven in, and any possible damage. Okay, so this is a fun one to talk about, the engine compartment. And I'm not going to go into, like a mechanical inspection that you might want to bring the car to a full-on mechanic to do. Again, we're going through looking for clues, see if anything is wrong, see if we can get information about how the car was cared for, how it was driven, how it was stored, things like that. And so this car has, I don't know, to me, one of the most interesting engine bays of any car in the last 50 years. For one thing, the engine's completely behind the front axle, so this is actually a mid-engine car. A lot of people don't realize that, but that gives this car very unique driving dynamics, because basically you, the driver, and the engine are both together between the axles, and that gives really great driving feel. So we've got our engine here tucked up back against the firewall behind that front axle, and you want to look over the engine bay. There should not be any rust here, except for maybe the tips of the bolts on the studs on the front struts. That's pretty much it. I mean, everything else in here is plated or painted or protected, and really should not show any signs of rust. There's a solenoid over here. A lot of times that'll be rusty, and that gives you a clue that maybe the car was driven in winter weather, or exposed to salt water, salt air near the ocean, or who knows what. But yeah, general appearance is very, very important here. By the way, I talked earlier about the VIN tags. Here's your VIN tag on fender, front bumper, and then the hood. Okay, those are pretty obvious when you're looking in here. A couple other things you want to do, check all the fluids. That'll tell you a lot. Are they clean? Do they look new? Brake fluid, clutch fluid, coolant, engine oil. Probably don't care about the windshield washer fluid, but that's back here. But look over all the critical fluids, and that'll tell you a lot about the car. The air filter is inside of this air box right here. Look at that. It should be good condition. In this car, it looked brand new. It probably had been replaced within the last couple months. And then the last thing you want to check visually is the serpentine belt over here that runs different accessories. And we noticed on this car, it's probably the original belt, so it's almost 20 years old at this point, and so that's going to get replaced. That's about a $140 part from a Honda dealer, although you can usually get it online discounted to about $100. But that's, you know, for peace of mind, just replace that if you don't know the age of that belt. Let's see. Yeah, okay, so if you get a fuse box over here, you want to maybe pop that open and make sure there's hasn't been any Mickey Mousing with the wiring. All the fuses are present and accounted for. Start up the engine, listen to it both from a cold start and then as it warms up. You know, there shouldn't be any knocking or ticking or strange noises. This is a very sophisticated engine. Once it warms up, it should be nice and smooth and quiet. One interesting thing we found on this car, there's a foam gasket that's supposed to be between the top of the radiator and this cross beam here, and that is gone, and likely because of age, that foam over time gets crumbly and disintegrates, and so that's I think that's about a $30 part if you buy it straight from Honda, and all you have to really do is scrape off the adhesive from the old gasket, slide the new one in there, position it first, and then reach behind it and peel off the backing for the tape, and you're good to go. You could probably even use generic foam for that. Probably not even important, to be honest, but you know, you do if you can replace it. It'll really help control the airflow through the front of the car into the radiator, and also keep hot air from rising up into this cold air intake right there. So that's really the only issue we found on this car. Everything else looks amazing. I mean, it really looks nice and clean under here, well cared for, and you know, we talked to the person who was selling this car. They did all their own work, which is fine. These are very easy cars to maintain. He had good memory of all the work he's done, and was knowledgeable about the car. So you don't necessarily need to have service records from a Honda dealer or a mechanic. If you get a feel that the owner of the car knew what he was doing and really cared about the car, that's to me equally important. Okay, so now we're starting to move through the interior of the car, and there's a lot to look at here too. Of course, you know, maybe start looking at the general condition of the seats, the doors, the carpeting, all the plastics, the dashboard, the shifter boot, the shifter handle, wear surfaces, you know, steering wheel. You want to look at that. That's going to give you a lot of clues about the car, how it was driven, how it was cared for. When I saw the interior of this car, I felt like I was back in 2005 looking at a brand new car. And this happens to be Suzuka blue paint over a blue interior, which I didn't really like back in the day, but now it just looks really sharp to me. Looks like it's just a really nice color combination. This was actually, I think, the second most common color in 2005. But by today's standards, blue on blue is something you just don't see very often. And so you want to look everything over. Some of the things in particular. You want to look at the seat bolsters, particularly this bolster right here, okay? Pretty much on 99% of the cars I look at, this has been smashed down beyond recognition and the leather is all wrinkly. That's probably the result of fat people like me squeezing into the car. But this car, the bolsters are like they would have been when the car was new. They've got nice firm foam, no deterioration, very minor wrinkling, and so that's a good key that or a good clue that you didn't have some fat guy like me squeezing in and out of the car all the time and smashing these down. I mean, whoever got in and out of this car was graceful enough and small enough and athletic enough to do it without wrecking the seats. And so this is a huge plus if you're a collector or you're just trying to find a good example of an S2000. If you can find one with good seat bolsters, man, that is something special. So that's a big deal to look at, and great thing about this car. Honda doesn't sell these floor mats anymore, so look at the floor mats. If they're worn out and shot, good luck. You're going to have to go aftermarket or find some used ones somewhere. These floor mats look great. There's really no wear on them. There's no heel spots. There's no stains. That's amazing. It probably tells me that the original owner of this car had another mat over the top of this or protected these, because those mats are in great shape. And then you want to look at the wear of the actual carpet on the floor itself. Really the main issue to key in on is there's some cross beams. I don't know if you'll see it in the video, but I'll put in some footage. There's a cross beam that reinforces the frame that goes across the car right here, and that has some edges on the carpet. It's very typical to see wear on those edges. This car looks great on this side, and there's really only very, very minor wear on the edge of that on the passenger side, and so that's great. Look at the shift knob in the boot. This looks great. And then this goes for any car, but you want to look at the condition of the pedals. And on some cars, I've looked at other cars that are claimed to have low mileage, but you look at it and you see major wear on the pedals, and that car's not 500,000 miles. 5,000 miles is probably 105,000 miles. So this car's got enough digits in the odometer that there's no doubt about that. But in general, when you're looking at a used car or a collector car, look at the pedals. They will tell you a story. And this car, I'm looking at the pedals. That is wear that's commensurate with the 31,000 miles that are on this vehicle. So that all lines up and tells a story. Nothing goofy going on down there. Everything's good, and just the general overall condition of the plastics and the panels here tell me again that this car was stored indoors and did not spend a whole lot of time outdoors. If you're looking at an S2000 that's spent a lot of time out in the sun, you're generally going to find that some of these knobs almost looks like the plastic is melted. It's really the no slip outer surface that's deteriorated. But on a garage kept car, these things all look brand new, all nice and clean. The vents all work nice and tight, and it just looks great to me. Again, this looks like a new car to me, which is miraculous for a car that's about 20 years old. And then the next thing we want to look at are all the controls, the gauges. In fact, I don't know if you'll see this in the camera, but I'm going to fire this up. S2000 was one of the few cars of that era that had a cool digital dash with cool graphics. So you want to make
Bluetooth
sure
mode.
All of this is functioning properly. Everything is nice and bright. Occasionally you run across a car where this instrument panel is crapped out, sometimes because the stereo installer messed up and damaged wiring. But that should all be nice and bright and legible. Check the function of your radio controls, your turn signal stalk, your headlights, cruise control, climate control. Make sure the air conditioning is working. And then if it's important to you for collector purposes, you do want to see the original radio down in here. It seems silly, but when I come across one of these cars where someone just slapped in a generic, Kenwood or Alpine or JVC radio or Sony or whatever, that's a downgrade in my book, because a collector wants to see the original radio, and this car has it. The radio door still works nice, and everything is good there. Let's see. Okay, so the only other thing to check is turn on the radio and listen to it. And on this car, the tweeters were fine, but the woofers in the lower part of the door were buzzing. That's a fairly common occurrence, and what happens is over time the foam gasket around the speaker, what we call the surround, that foam deteriorates and starts crumbling, and the speaker cone ends up buzzing and rattling. And so you can't buy these speakers anymore if you want the originals, but this is a 6.5-inch speaker. If you can find a shallow aftermarket speaker and replace it, that'll solve that problem. That's $60-70 worth of expense. So I think that does it for the interior. I guess the only other thing I want to mention, there's a bunch of hidden compartments in the center console back here. Check those over. You might find a surprise. It's always fun to see what's in there. I've actually I've looked at cars and talked to original owners who didn't even know some of those compartments were there. They've had the cars 15, 20 years, had no clue there was a compartment up there. So it's always fun to look in there. But I think that's going to do it for the interior, so we will move on to the trunk next. All right, so we're back at the trunk here, and before I forget, I want to point out here's the VIN sticker on the trunk lid. Here's the VIN sticker on the back bumper. You want to check for both of those. I didn't really mention it earlier, but check that the stickers are there. Check that they're not painted over or damaged or anything, and then check the number. Make sure it's actually the right part on the right car, because I've seen that too. You go around and say, oh yeah, all the stickers were there, then you look closer and, well, this trunk obviously came off of a different car, and there's probably a story behind that. But in general, check the operation of the trunk, check that the remote works from inside the car to pop it open. Check all your keys and remotes, make sure they all work. You should get It's 3 keys with the car. A main key that has an S2000 metal insert on it, nice key, very collectible. A standard key, and then a valet key, and then you should get 2 remotes. If the car has an alarm system, which was a Honda dealer accessory, you may have 2 extra remotes. But that's something you want to check for that I haven't mentioned already. But in terms of the trunk, look at all the carpet and paneling. Look for any stains, any wear, any signs of leaks, any signs of chemical damage. There's a lot of stories just by looking at the condition of the trunk. And this is another part of this car that looks brand new to me. It's just amazing how well this car was cared for. It's just in beautiful condition. I mean, it's hard to get excited about a trunk, but this is a pretty special trunk. The spare tires back here, you can pop off these fasteners and get a look in there. This car, the spare tire looked really dingy, but it's because it's had never been used. The rubber kind of gets an oxidation to it, but that's an unused spare tire in there. One thing you probably want to do, some people will replace these tires. They're hard to find. I would at least pump it up, check that it holds air over a period of a couple weeks, and it's okay. If it doesn't hold air, well, then you definitely want to replace it. But check that. And then down at the bottom of the trunk, if you lift the bottom panel off, there should be a tool kit under there, jack handle, lug wrench, tow hook, things like that. There might be wheel lock keys down there as well. And so that's it for the trunk. But again, this is just a really beautiful trunk, and great indication of the overall condition of the car. Okay, so the last thing you want to focus on is take the car out for a drive and see how it does. Again, these were really brilliantly engineered sports cars. It should be very impressive to drive. Keep in mind, it's this one's 20 years old now. 240 horsepower was pretty good 20 years ago. Nowadays, that's peanuts. So it's not going to be crazy fast, but these cars should drive very well. Within 30 seconds of driving in this car, you should be really happy and excited and realize that this is a special car. So if you don't get that sensation, maybe there's something else to look into. But what you want to look at, make sure the steering is tight and accurate. Make sure the car tracks straight, rides smoothly. I mean, it's a sports car. It's not going to be smooth over bumps, but it should be nice and stable. Sure, so certainly be smooth on a nice stretch of good road. Check the clutch engagement. Make sure it engages well. Doesn't make any noises. There are tests you can do to determine if a clutch is bad. Normally, you might want to pop the car in like 5th gear from a dead stop. Let the clutch out. If the clutch is good, it should kill the engine. If the clutch is bad, the clutch will slip. I don't usually do that test unless I think something else is wrong, and in this car, the clutch seemed fine to me. It's only got 31,000 miles. Clutch seemed fine. That's another clue that whoever drove this car the previous 20 years drove it pretty gently with no abuse. You want to check that the shifter is precise. This is one of the greatest shifters of all time, well acknowledged in the automotive industry. So it should feel nice and tight and very, very mechanical, because this is one of the rare shifters where, you know, you've got a direct linkage into the forks selecting gears inside of the transmission. It should feel that way. It should feel mechanical, should feel tight, should be precise, shouldn't have any trouble engaging any of the gears. There should not be any grinding. If you detect any grinding, you know, it could be a bad synchro. That could mean the transmission needs some work. Check the brakes. You know, they should function. Bring the car to a stop. Should be no noise or vibration. If you feel vibration through the steering wheel, the rotors might be warped. I don't run into that very often on these cars. But if the car was abused and driven hard or tracked, these are not track brakes, okay? So if someone takes this to the track and beats on the brakes, the rotors are probably going to warp. So you do want to check on that. You know, just check the general behavior of the suspension. It should be smooth and stable, no wallowing or bobbing. I think I mentioned earlier, this is a mid-engine car, fairly long wheelbase for the size of the car. I mean, the wheels are darn near as close to the front of the car as you can get. You, the driver, are in the middle. It should have a very classic mid-engine car feel, just very composed and poised on the road, and that's what you should notice. And again, that's the kind of thing when you're driving this car, you'll be saying to yourself, "This is amazing," and it's because of the overall architecture of the car, and that's what you should be noticing. So these cars had a lot of rattles even when they were brand new. And this car, when you put the top down and you're driving around, it sounds like someone's back behind you shaking a can of popcorn kernels. That's pretty typical. I don't run into any of these cars that don't have rattles. I might almost be suspicious if I didn't detect rattles. So some rattles are normal. There shouldn't be parts shaking and flying off the car, but you will hear some rattles. It shouldn't be anything beyond an amusing level of rattles. And then, you know, pay attention to the engine. It should rev freely, pull strongly. And these engines sound great. You know, this is a Honda inline 4-cylinder with VTEC. Very, very respected special engine design. It should sound good. VTEC will kick in somewhere between 5,800 and 6,100 RPM. You'll feel a surge of power. The RPMs will shoot up. That's all normal behavior. These cars didn't have a whole lot of torque down low, so it's not going to seem really, you know, aggressive off the line or at low speed. All the action happens at the high end of the RPM range. If the engine has been well maintained and is in good shape, you should have no reservations about taking this thing, you know, above 6,000 all the way up to the red line, which on this AP2 is at 8,000. And the AP1, it's like at 8,900 or 9,000. So keep that in mind. These cars are meant to be driven in the high end of the RPM range. Try that out when you're evaluating the car. All right, so we're coming to the end of the video where basically this is the part of the report where I kind of do an overall summary and give my thoughts on the car. And again, you can download this report and follow along. And so I'll go through some of my comments on this car. First, I consider this to be an exceptional original owner 2005 S2000. It is in great condition. It really only has minor wear and tear in the form of paint chips here and there and some paint touch-ups that the previous owner did. But that's all consistent with, you know, a 20-year-old car that's driven 31,000 miles. It's everything about this points to the fact that this was garage kept, driven gently, and taken very good care of. It's nice to see a car like this. I mean, it's nice to know when a car was loved because it's a good investment for you. It's good as a collector car, and you know, you'll probably love it too going forward. The biggest flaw that I found on this car to point out is that, you know, there's probably a dozen or so minor paint chips and touch-ups around the car, but that is minor in the context of a car that has all original paint, no body work, all the VIN tags, nothing has been repainted. I see a lot of times in auctions where you'll see a car come up for auction and the previous owner had the front bumper repainted because there was damage where a license plate used to be. And people get so sensitive about cars with front license plates, I don't understand. And so they'll have that bumper repainted thinking they're doing something good, but what have they done? They've gotten rid of the originality of the factory paint. They've either painted over or screwed up the VIN tag. And those are big dings against the value of a car if you're looking at originality and collector type of consideration. So, you know, you'll see that in a lot of these cars. People have good intentions about repainting body panels, or like the bottom of the chin will be scraped, so they repaint the whole front bumper and, you know, paint over the VIN tag. Stupid, okay? Scrapes on the bottom of a chin, that's normal for a 20-year-old car with tens of thousands of miles. Leave that stuff alone. Focus on the originality of the paintwork. And that's one of the strengths of this car. Really, really nice original paintwork. Let's see. Yeah, and so I'm recommending no corrective work. You know, I think there's a new chip on the hood down to the metal that should be touched up. And then there was a scuff on the front bumper that happened in shipping. It doesn't even bother me. I have a feeling if you buffed it and waxed it, it would look 1,000 times better. If you ever want to address an issue like a scuff, take it to an airbrush specialist. They can do a local repair. They can lay down new paint or new clear coat and then blend it just in that spot and keep all the rest of your paint original. So that's my recommendation here. If that's an issue, you know, that's a few $100s to get that done. That's the way to go, but preserve the original paint because it's one of the strong points of this car. So the other knock on this car, you know, we talked to the seller and they readily shared information about the maintenance they did, clearly knowledgeable about the car, knew exactly when things were done, gave us a couple parts with the car that they hadn't put on yet. And so that's all a good sign, but there are no maintenance records, there's no history, we don't have the window sticker, we don't have any of the paperwork from the original purchase, and that's all nice to have if you're gonna collect a car. You know, if you can start a notebook and have all the records from the first owner, add to it as the second owner, when you go to sell the car, pass it on to the third owner, that's gonna increase the value significantly. So this car, other than the Carfax and a receipt for tires 12 years ago, we don't have any records. So that's a knock against the car from a valuation standpoint. And that would be really bad for a car like, say, you're looking at like a Ferrari or some other high-end classic car. Those cars, you need to demonstrate maintenance and upkeep and records as part of the provenance of that car. Otherwise, it really hurts value. These cars, you know, they were Hondas. They were built very well. They're very reliable. They required little to no maintenance. They were not expensive cars. People who bought them loved them, but they didn't think of them as future collector cars. And so I'd say 80% of the S2000s I look at and evaluate and appraise don't have any records at all. Because it was just a Honda. There weren't any issues. Why keep records? And so that's an unfortunate side of these cars. You can run into a beautiful car like this, but it has no records. It's kind of a fact of life with these cars. If you find one that's beautiful and has a lot of records, you know, first of all, be prepared to pay more, but jump on it because that's going to be a rare thing. So in general, because of the lack of records you'll find on these cars, you have to really judge the car's history based on the present condition that you see in front of you. And fortunately, this car presents extremely well based on everything you would evaluate, all the possible clues, all the things we look for, you know, what we lost in records and history. It's kind of made up for in terms of the general condition of the car. The condition doesn't lie, okay? So that's kind of the final judge on things. But again, if you can get records, that's a big plus. So I close out by saying I would rate this car as a strong number 2 condition car. And I use Hagerty valuation guides for that. You can create a free account on Hagerty and get access to their valuation numbers for cars. And I think a number one car would be $53,000, and number two is $42,000, and then it drops into the 20s as you get into the number three condition. But this is a strong number two, so Hagerty would value this at just over $42,000. And this is where I think I want to pass on some good advice. You need to have the value of the car in mind before you buy the car, before you put bids in at an auction, and then take into account everything else, okay? And some of the things I note here, auto transport, auction fees, state title taxes, all of those things are going to add up. And you know, you could get the car for a great deal, but then you're going to spend another $6,000 to $8,000 to get it to your house and register it and own it. You know, that could push you past the point where it was a good decision. So you want to factor all those things in. This car, you know, I would say you're probably going to spend $800 to $1,000 on new tires, $200 to $300 on parts and fluids to get all the maintenance up to date that we maybe don't have a record of. So that might be, you know, new transmission, gear oil, change the gear oil in the rear diff, things like that. Maybe the new serpentine belt. So, you know, $800 to $1,000 for tires, $200 to $300 in parts and fluids. And then if the buyer wants to fix that scuff in the front bumper, $200 to $300 for airbrush work. Add all that together with your shipping costs, auction fees, everything else, and see where you are. You can, you know, really work backwards. Say, I think the car's worth this. It's going to cost me this much to do all these things. Subtract that. That tells you really what you should be paying for the car if you're buying it at an auction. Have some discipline. Don't go too far beyond that. I see people go crazy on these cars, spend too much money. And then when you add all the fees and other things in there, way past the value of the car. That's just stupid, because just wait. You'll find just as good of a car that you can get for a better price and not be underwater right away, okay? I know, I mean, I'm a car guy. I do stupid things with cars and money, but be sensible about that. Understand the value, the condition, and work backwards, taking out all your expenses to know what you should be paying for the car. So I was recommending, you know, Hagerty values it at $42,000, and that's a fully reconditioned value where there's, you know, all the flaws have been fixed. I would recommend insuring this car for about $38,000 to $40,000 agreed value, which again, hopefully will cover all the expenses of the buyer and also be a fair representation of the car and cover the buyer in case there's any kind of loss for any reason. And then my last note is that, you know, if the seller can give us any additional records, that will be a plus going forward into the future. So I think that's going to do it for this video. I think I covered everything I wanted to. Again, I'll put a link to a sanitized version of this report where I just take out any private information so you can look at the things I judge and you know, not necessarily specific to this car, but just the things I look for. And I hope that will help people make more educated decisions about buying these cars. You really need to think all this stuff through. I see a lot of people on auctions that don't understand this. They're missing obvious issues. I remember one particular S2000, beautiful car, sold for a lot of money, but you know, you look at the pictures and somebody had jacked it up wrong in the front and bent the edge of the fender and caused damage to the rocker panel, and it was missing the tools in the back. The back bumper was out of whack, and somebody paid way too much for that car. I'm like, you know, if they just knew a few of these things to look for, it might have saved them from making a mistake. It might have helped them pick a better car and spend less money. So I hope this has been useful. As always, thanks for watching.